black waitress paid bill for a stranger who forgot wallet, unaware he was the undercover CEO. The coffee maker at Murphy's Diner let out its familiar wheeze at exactly 6:47 p.m., and Danielle Carter knew she had at least 4 more hours until closing. Her feet already ached from the morning shift at the warehouse, where she'd spent 6 hours sorting packages for $12 an hour. Now, as the dinner rush began to pick up, she tied her apron tighter and forced her best smile. "Table 4 needs their check, honey," called out Mrs. Rodriguez, the evening cook, her voice carrying over the sizzle of burgers on the grill. "And that couple at table 2 wants extra ranch." "On it," Danielle replied, grabbing the check from the register. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, probably another text she couldn't afford to answer right now. The dinner crowd was unforgiving, and Murphy's Diner wasn't the kind of place where you could slack off, even for a second. She approached table 4 with practiced efficiency. "Here's your check, folks. How was everything tonight?" The middle-aged man barely looked up from his phone. "Fine," he grunted, tossing a 20 on the table without checking the total. The bill was $1,850. A $1.50 tip on a $18 order. Danielle's smile never wavered. "Thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful evening." As she cleared the table, her phone buzzed again. This time, she couldn't ignore it. The text was from her younger brother, Kevin. "D. The tuition payment is due Friday. Still short $300. Any chance you can help?" Her heart sank. Kevin was a sophomore at the community college, studying automotive repair, his dream of opening his own shop keeping him motivated through every late-night study session. She'd promised to help with tuition when their father walked out 2 years ago, leaving behind nothing but empty beer cans and a stack of unpaid bills. "Danielle!" The sharp voice of Mr. Peterson, the floor manager, cut through her thoughts. "Table 6 has been waiting 5 minutes for water." "Sorry, Mr. Peterson," she said, quickly grabbing a pitcher and hurrying over to the booth where a family of 5 sat with empty glasses. The mother gave her a tired but understanding smile, the kind that said she'd been in Danielle's shoes before. "Sorry about the wait, folks." "Here we go," Danielle said, filling each glass with practiced precision. The youngest child, maybe 7 years old, looked up at her with wide eyes. "Are you tired, lady?" the little girl asked innocently. "Maya, don't bother the nice waitress," the mother whispered, embarrassed. But Danielle knelt down to the child's eye level. "You know what? I am a little tired, sweetie. But seeing your beautiful smile just gave me some energy. What would you like to drink with dinner?" The little girl beamed, and even the weary mother's expression softened. These moments, these tiny connections with strangers, reminded Danielle why she kept pushing through each day. Her phone buzzed again as she walked back to the kitchen. This time it was her mother. "Danielle, baby," the hospital called. "They need the payment for my diabetes medication by tomorrow, or they can't refill it. I know you're working hard, but..." Danielle leaned against the kitchen doorframe for just a moment, closing her eyes. Her mother's condition had worsened over the past 6 months, requiring expensive insulin that their insurance barely covered. Between Kevin's tuition, Mom's medical bills, and her own rent, which had just jumped another $50 this month, she felt like she was drowning in an ocean of numbers that never added up right. "You okay, Mija?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked, noticing Danielle's pause. "Yeah, just catching my breath," Danielle lied, straightening up. "The dinner rush always gets crazy." Mrs. Rodriguez had worked at Murphy's for 15 years and could read people like an open book. She ladled some soup into a bowl and slid it across the kitchen counter. "Eat something. You look like you haven't had a proper meal all day." "I can't afford." "It's on me," Mrs. Rodriguez insisted. "You take care of everyone else. Let someone take care of you for 5 minutes." The kindness nearly brought tears to Danielle's eyes. She quickly took a few spoonfuls of the warm chicken soup, feeling the heat spread through her chest. It was the first real food she'd had since a gas station granola bar at 10 a.m. As the evening wore on, Danielle moved through her section with the rhythm of someone who'd mastered the art of survival. Smile, take orders, deliver food, clear tables, smile again. Each interaction was genuine. She asked the elderly gentleman at table 3 about his grandchildren, remembered that the woman at table 5 liked her coffee black with extra sugar, and even managed to make the grumpy teenager at table 7 crack a smile with a joke about the weather. By 9 p.m., the dinner crowd had thinned to just a few scattered customers. Danielle counted her tips in the back corner booth, $43.27. Not enough for Kevin's tuition gap, not enough for Mom's medication, definitely not enough for the rent increase. But enough to buy groceries tomorrow, if she stuck to the basics. She looked around the diner, at the cracked vinyl booths, the flickering neon sign, the coffee-stained floor that had seen thousands of stories unfold. This place wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work among honest people. Most days, that felt like enough. The bell above the front door chimed, and Danielle looked up to see a man walking in alone. He looked tired, wearing simple work clothes, nothing that made him stand out. Just another customer ending a long day, looking for a hot meal and a moment's peace. "Sit anywhere you like," she called out, grabbing a menu. "I'll be right with you." The man who walked through the door at 9:15 p.m. didn't look like much, medium height, wearing a faded blue work shirt and jeans that had seen better days. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and there were tired lines around his eyes that spoke of long days and longer nights. He paused just inside the entrance, scanning the nearly empty diner with the careful attention of someone who noticed details. "Evening," Danielle said warmly as she approached with a menu. "You're just in time. We're open until midnight, so no rush." The man settled into the corner booth at table 7, the one with the slightly wobbly leg that regular customers knew to avoid. He didn't seem to mind. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of an accent that Danielle couldn't quite place. Maybe from somewhere up north. As she set the menu in front of him, she noticed his hands, clean but calloused, like someone who worked with them but took care of himself. There was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his humble appearance. "Can I start you off with something to drink?" "Coffee's fresh, well, relatively fresh," she said with a small smile. "Mrs. Rodriguez made a new pot about an hour ago, which in diner time means it's practically gourmet." That earned her the faintest hint of a smile. "Coffee sounds perfect. Black." While Danielle went to pour his coffee, the man, who had introduced himself simply as Mark when she asked, took in everything around him. He watched as Mrs. Rodriguez called out an order with genuine warmth in her voice. He observed Mr. Peterson behind the register, noting how the manager's demeanor shifted depending on who he was talking to, friendly with well-dressed customers, curt with others. Most importantly, he watched Danielle. She moved through the diner with practiced grace, but there was something more. When she delivered the check to the elderly gentleman at table 3, she lingered for a moment to ask about the photos he was showing his companion. When the young couple at table 5 seemed to be having a heated discussion, she gave them space but kept an eye on them, ready to intervene if needed. "Here's your coffee," she said, returning with a steaming mug. "Have you had a chance to look at the menu, or would you like a few more minutes?" "What do you recommend?" Mark asked, studying her face. Her smile was tired but genuine, not the forced cheerfulness he'd seen in so many service workers who were just going through the motions. "Well, if you're looking for comfort food, Mrs. Rodriguez makes the best meatloaf this side of the Mississippi. But if you want my honest opinion," she leaned in conspiratorially, lowering her voice, "the grilled cheese and tomato soup is where it's at. Sounds simple, but she uses this 3-cheese blend that's basically magic. Plus, it's Tuesday, and Tuesdays call for comfort food. Trust me on this, I'm a professional comfort food assessor." Mark found himself genuinely smiling for the first time in weeks. "Professional comfort food assessor?" "Absolutely. I've been in the business for 3 years, and I take my assessments very seriously," Danielle said, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "I even have a mental rating system. The grilled cheese scores a solid 92 out of 10. Only loses points because it doesn't come with a side of happiness, but that's extra." "And what would a side of happiness be?" usually involves Mrs. Rodriguez telling you about her grandson's latest soccer game while you eat. She's very proud. Fair warning, you might end up seeing pictures. As if summoned, Mrs. Rodriguez poked her head out of the kitchen window. Danielle, Mija, tell your customer about Miguel's winning goal. Danielle grinned and shook her head. See? Called it. So, grilled cheese and soup? You've convinced me, Mark said. And I'll take the happiness upgrade too. As Danielle walked away to place his order, Mark continued his quiet observation. He noticed how she checked on her other tables without being intrusive, how she remembered that the couple at table 5 liked extra napkins, how she automatically refilled the elderly man's water glass without being asked. But he also noticed other things. The way she discreetly glanced at her phone when she thought no one was looking, the slight slump in her shoulders between customers, the careful way she counted the tips in her apron pocket. There was a story there, layers beneath the cheerful professionalism. 1 magical grilled cheese, 1 perfect tomato soup, and 1 serving of grandmother pride, Danielle announced as she returned with his meal. The grilled cheese was golden brown and perfectly crispy, the soup steaming in a bowl that had probably seen 1,000 meals just like this one. Mark took a bite and nodded appreciatively. The rating system is accurate. I don't mess around when it comes to comfort food evaluation, she replied. Mrs. Rodriguez will be thrilled. She takes her cooking very personally. As if on cue, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at the table with a photo on her phone. My grandson Miguel, he scored the winning goal last weekend, she announced proudly, showing Mark a picture of a grinning 10-year-old in a soccer uniform. Mark examined the photo with genuine interest, asking questions about Miguel's team and the game. As Mrs. Rodriguez beamed and launched into a detailed recap, he caught Danielle's eye. She was leaning against the neighboring booth, watching the interaction with a warm expression that suggested she'd orchestrated this moment of connection between strangers. There was something special about this place, Mark realized. Something that had nothing to do with the slightly sticky floor or the wobbly table leg. It was in the way people cared for each other, in the small kindnesses that happened between strangers. He was still thinking about this when it came time to pay the check. Mark finished the last spoonful of soup and leaned back in the booth with genuine satisfaction. The meal had been exactly what he needed, simple, warm, and served with the kind of authentic care that couldn't be manufactured or trained. He reached for his back pocket to get his wallet, already planning to leave a generous tip for Danielle's exceptional service. His hand found nothing but empty denim. A cold realization washed over him as he frantically patted his other pockets. Jacket, empty. Front pants pockets, just his keys and phone. The wallet he'd grabbed that morning before changing into his work clothes for this undercover visit was sitting on his dresser at home, right next to his real business cards and identification. Everything all right, sir? Danielle approached with the check, noting his increasingly panicked pocket searching. Mark looked up at her, his face flushed with embarrassment. Hi, this is incredibly embarrassing, but I think I forgot my wallet at home. I was rushing out this morning and... He trailed off, realizing how pathetic the excuse sounded. Danielle's expression remained kind, but she glanced around nervously. Oh, okay. That happens sometimes. Do you have anyone who could bring it, or maybe you could come back tomorrow? Before Mark could respond, Mr. Peterson materialized at their table like a hawk swooping on prey. He'd been watching the interaction from behind the register, and his expression was already set in hard lines of suspicion and disdain. Problem here? Peterson asked, his tone making it clear he'd already decided there was. No problem, Mark said quickly, standing up from the booth. I just need to go home and get my wallet. I can be back in. Oh, I bet you can, Peterson interrupted, his voice loud enough that the few remaining customers turned to look. Let me guess. You just happened to forget your wallet after ordering a full meal. What a coincidence. Sir, it's really not. Danielle started, but Peterson cut her off with a sharp gesture. Danielle stepped back. I've seen this scam a dozen times. He turned his attention back to Mark, crossing his arms. You come in here, order food, eat it all up, and then miraculously discover you have no way to pay. Real convenient. Mark felt anger rising in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. I understand your suspicion, but I assure you this is just an honest mistake. I can show you my phone, I can call someone to bring money, or I can leave my phone here as collateral while I go get my wallet. Your phone? Peterson scoffed. What's that worth? Probably some cheap knockoff anyway. He looked Mark up and down dismissively, taking in the worn work clothes and slightly scuffed boots. I've got news for you, buddy. People like you think you can waltz in here and take advantage of hardworking folks. Well, not on my watch. The tension in the diner was palpable now. Mrs. Rodriguez had stopped cooking to peer out from the kitchen window, concern written across her face. The elderly gentleman at table 3 was pretending to read his newspaper while obviously listening to every word. Even the young couple at table 5 had stopped their conversation to watch the scene unfold. Mr. Peterson, please, Danielle said, stepping forward with her hands raised peacefully. There's no need to. There's every need, Peterson snapped, his voice rising. Do you know how many deadbeats try to pull this exact same stunt? They come in here, fill their bellies, and then suddenly have amnesia about their wallets. I'm calling the police. Mark's jaw tightened. That's completely unnecessary. I'm telling you the truth. The truth? Peterson let out a harsh laugh. The truth is you're trying to steal from this establishment. The truth is you probably don't have 2 nickels to rub together, and you thought you could scam a free meal out of us. Hey! The sharp word came from Danielle, and both men turned to look at her in surprise. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried an authority that immediately commanded attention. Mr. Peterson, that's enough. Peterson's eyes narrowed. Excuse me? I said that's enough. Danielle's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the softness. This gentleman has been nothing but polite and respectful. He's offered solutions, and you're treating him like a criminal without any proof of wrongdoing. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out the small bundle of bills, her tips from the entire evening. Mark watched in stunned silence as she counted out the exact amount of the check, $1,450. Here, she said, placing the money on the table. The bill is paid. Peterson stared at her in disbelief. Danielle, what are you doing? You can't. Yes, I can, she said firmly. It's my money, and I can spend it however I choose. Consider this handled. Mark felt his throat tighten as he watched this woman, who clearly couldn't afford to lose $14.50, sacrifice her hard-earned tips to save him from further humiliation. The weight of her generosity hit him like a physical blow. Miss, he said quietly, I can't let you do this. This is too much. Danielle smiled at him, the same genuine warmth she'd shown all evening. It's not a big deal, she said, though they both knew it absolutely was. Everyone has bad days. Everyone forgets things. It happens. But as she spoke those words, Mark could see the worry flickering behind her eyes, the quick mental calculation of what this would mean for her budget. He had just witnessed something extraordinary, pure, selfless kindness in action. Peterson stood there sputtering, clearly frustrated that his moment of righteous authority had been undermined by an act of simple human decency. After Mark left, profusely thanking Danielle and promising to return the next day, the diner fell back into its usual late-evening quiet. Peterson retreated to his office, muttering under his breath about bleeding hearts and setting bad precedents. The few remaining customers finished their meals and drifted out into the night, leaving just Danielle, Mrs. Rodriguez, and the steady hum of the old refrigerator. Danielle began wiping down tables with more force than necessary, trying to work off the adrenaline from the confrontation. Her hands shook slightly as she moved the damp cloth in careful circles, and she kept glancing at her apron pocket where her tip money used to be. Mija, Mrs. Rodriguez called softly from the kitchen window. Come here. Danielle looked up, suddenly aware that tears had been threatening at the corners of her eyes. She walked over to the pass-through window where Mrs. Rodriguez waited with 2 cups of coffee and a plate of leftover pie. Sit, the older woman commanded gently, nodding toward the counter stools. "We need to talk." For a moment Danielle considered protesting. There were still tables to clean, salt shakers to fill, prep work for tomorrow. But something in Mrs. Rodriguez's motherly gaze broke through her defenses, and she sank onto the stool with a heavy sigh. "That was a beautiful thing you did," Mrs. Rodriguez said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter. "But it was also expensive for you." Danielle stared down at the coffee, watching the steam rise in delicate spirals. "It wasn't that much money," she said quietly. "Danielle," Mrs. Rodriguez's voice carried 15 years of wisdom earned in this very diner. "I know what you make here. I know you work 2 jobs. And I know $14.50 isn't not that much money for someone in your situation." The tears Danielle had been holding back finally spilled over. "I couldn't just watch him stand there like that," she whispered. "Peterson was treating him like he was nothing. Like he was trying to steal from us when he was just embarrassed and trying to figure it out." Mrs. Rodriguez reached across the counter and squeezed Danielle's hand. "Tell me why, Mija. What made you step in like that?" Danielle wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of mascara on her wrist. She took a shaky breath and looked up at the ceiling, as if the words she needed were written somewhere in the water-stained tiles. "When I was 15, she began slowly. My dad had just left, and Mom was working 3 part-time jobs trying to keep us afloat. Kevin was just 13, and he was growing so fast we couldn't keep him in clothes that fit. One night, Mom came home with this tiny bag of groceries, just bread, peanut butter, and some generic mac and cheese. That was supposed to last us 4 days." Mrs. Rodriguez listened silently, her weathered hands wrapped around her coffee cup. "The next day at school, I was so hungry I couldn't concentrate. I hadn't eaten breakfast, obviously couldn't afford lunch. I was sitting in the cafeteria trying to pretend I wasn't starving when this girl, Sarah something, I barely knew her, she just put half her sandwich on my table and walked away. Didn't make a big deal about it, didn't ask questions. Just saw that I needed help." Danielle's voice cracked slightly. "But the worst part wasn't being hungry. The worst part was the shame. The way people looked at you when you couldn't pay for things, when you had to count quarters to buy a candy bar, when your clothes didn't fit right because you couldn't afford new ones. That look in their eyes like you were less than human." She picked at the edge of her napkin, shredding it into tiny pieces. "That man tonight, Mark, he had that same look in his eyes when Peterson started yelling at him. That shame. That feeling of being small and worthless just because he made an honest mistake. So you stepped in?" Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "If I can spare someone that shame, even once, it's worth it," Danielle said firmly, echoing the conviction that had driven her actions. "Money comes and goes, but dignity. Once someone takes that from you, it's hard to get back." Mrs. Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment, studying Danielle's face. "You have a good heart, Mija. Too good, maybe." Danielle let out a bitter laugh. "Kevin would disagree. I just texted him that I can't help with his tuition payment this month. And Mom," she pulled out her phone and showed Mrs. Rodriguez the text about the diabetes medication. "I was supposed to pick up groceries after work, but now—" She gestured helplessly at her nearly empty apron pocket. "What time do you have to be at the warehouse tomorrow?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. 6 a.m., Danielle said, exhaustion creeping into her voice. "Same as always. Then back here at 5 for another dinner shift." Mrs. Rodriguez shook her head in amazement. 18 hours between jobs to sleep, eat, and try to have a life. And you still found it in your heart to help a stranger. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just stupid," Danielle admitted. "Maybe Peterson was right. Maybe I am too soft for this world." "No, Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez said firmly, reaching into her own pocket. She pulled out a $20 bill and pressed it into Danielle's hand. "The world needs more people like you, not fewer. This is for groceries. And don't you dare argue with me." Danielle looked at the money, then at Mrs. Rodriguez's determined expression, and felt fresh tears spring to her eyes. "I can't keep taking charity from everyone." "It's not charity," Mrs. Rodriguez interrupted. It's family. And family takes care of each other. As Danielle walked to her car 2 hours later, her body ached with the familiar exhaustion of another double-shift day. Tomorrow would bring the same routine: warehouse at dawn, diner at dusk, bills that never seemed to shrink, and dreams that felt impossibly far away. But tonight she had chosen kindness over self-preservation, and somehow that felt like victory. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching Danielle's mood as she dragged herself through another warehouse shift. Her phone had buzzed twice with texts from Kevin asking about the tuition money, and once from her mother wondering if she'd been able to pick up the medication. Each message felt like a small weight added to an already heavy load. By 4:45 p.m., she was back at Murphy's Diner, tying her apron and preparing for another dinner rush. The memory of the night before lingered, not just the $14.50 she'd spent, but the genuine gratitude in the stranger's eyes. Sometimes that had to be enough. "You look tired, Mija," Mrs. Rodriguez observed as Danielle walked into the kitchen. "Did you get any sleep?" "Some," Danielle lied, accepting a cup of coffee. In truth, she'd lain awake calculating and recalculating her budget, trying to figure out how to make the numbers work. They never did. The dinner crowd was typical for a Wednesday: a few early birds, some regulars, and a handful of business people grabbing quick meals. Danielle moved through her section with practiced efficiency, her smile genuine despite her exhaustion. At 6:30 p.m., the front door opened with its familiar chime, and Danielle glanced up automatically to greet the new customer. Her breath caught in her throat. It was Mark, but not the Mark from last night. This man wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than she made in 3 months. His hair was styled immaculately, and he carried himself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of people. Even his walk was different, confident, purposeful, the kind of stride that parted crowds. Every conversation in the diner seemed to pause as he entered. The businessman at table 2 looked up from his laptop and straightened in his seat. The young mother at table 5 stopped cutting her toddler's chicken nuggets to stare. Even Mr. Peterson, who had been counting the register behind the counter, froze mid-count. The man, Mark, scanned the room with sharp, assessing eyes until they found Danielle. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he walked directly toward her section. "Good evening," he said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority as his appearance. "Could I speak with you for a moment, Danielle?" She nodded mutely, wiping her suddenly sweaty palms on her apron. Up close, the transformation was even more startling. This wasn't the tired, humble man who had struggled to pay his check. This was someone who clearly belonged in boardrooms and corner offices. "I believe we met last night," he said loud enough that nearby tables could hear. "Though I wasn't entirely honest about who I am." Peterson appeared at their side as if summoned by some customer service instinct, his demeanor obsequious in the way it only became around obviously wealthy patrons. "Is everything all right here?" "Sir, if there's anything we can do to—" "Actually, yes," the man said, turning to face Peterson with a cool smile. "You can listen carefully to what I'm about to say." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, holding it so both Danielle and Peterson could see it clearly. The color drained from Peterson's face as he read the elegant script. Marcus Green, Chief Executive Officer, Atlantic Restaurant Group. Danielle stared at the card, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. Atlantic Restaurant Group owned Murphy's Diner, along with 47 other restaurants across the tri-state area. And this man, this CEO who probably made more in an hour than she made in a month, was the same person she'd bought dinner for last night. "My name is Marcus Green," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent diner. "I own this restaurant, along with several others. Last night, I came in dressed as you see me now because I do this regularly. I visit our locations undercover to observe how our employees treat customers in various situations." Peterson's face had gone from pale to a sickly green. "Mr. Green, sir, I had no idea." "Of course you didn't," Marcus said smoothly. "That was rather the point. You see, I've learned that people's true character emerges when they think no one important is watching. When they believe their actions won't have consequences. Mrs. Rodriguez had emerged from the kitchen, along with the night cook and 2 other servers. Word was spreading quickly, whispered conversations, wide eyes, the kind of electric tension that comes when everyone realizes they're witnessing something extraordinary. Marcus turned back to Danielle, his expression softening. Last night, when I couldn't pay my check, I found myself in a vulnerable position. I was embarrassed, frustrated, and honestly a little angry at my own carelessness. But what happened next taught me something invaluable about the kind of people we employ here. Danielle's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Mr. Green, You stepped in. He continued, when you could have easily looked the other way. When your manager was treating me with suspicion and disdain, you chose compassion. You paid for a stranger's meal with money I suspect you couldn't afford to lose. The diner was completely silent now except for the hum of the refrigerators and the distant sound of traffic outside. Every customer, every employee, every person in the building was focused on this moment. You didn't know who I was, Marcus said, his voice growing warmer. You had no reason to believe helping me would benefit you in any way. You did it because it was the right thing to do. Because you saw someone in distress and chose to act with kindness rather than judgment. He glanced meaningfully at Peterson, whose face was now a fascinating shade of red. It was a lesson in character that I won't soon forget. Marcus reached into his other jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. Which brings us to why I'm here today. Marcus held the envelope in his hands like it contained something precious, which, for Danielle, it absolutely did. The entire diner remained frozen in anticipation, as if everyone was holding their breath for what would come next. First, Marcus said, I want to return what you spent on my meal last night. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a $50 bill, placing it on the table. With interest, for your kindness. Danielle stared at the money, her eyes wide. Mr. Green, that's too much. It's not nearly enough. He interrupted gently. But we're just getting started. He held up the envelope. Danielle, in my 15 years of running restaurants, I've seen thousands of employees come and go. Most do their jobs competently. Some excel at customer service. But very rarely do I encounter someone who demonstrates the kind of genuine character you showed last night. Peterson shifted uncomfortably beside them, sweat beading on his forehead as he realized his career was likely hanging by a thread. Which is why, Marcus continued, I'm offering you a position as Regional Customer Experience Manager for our tri-state operations. It comes with a salary of $52,000 per year, full health benefits, and a company car. Your job would be to visit our restaurants, train staff on customer relations, and help implement policies that ensure every customer feels valued and respected. Danielle felt her knees go weak. The warehouse job paid her $12 an hour. The diner paid $213 plus tips. Combined, she barely scraped together $28,000 a year before taxes. The number Marcus had just mentioned seemed impossible, like he was speaking a foreign language. I don't understand, she whispered. I don't have a college degree. I don't have management experience. You have something far more valuable, Marcus said firmly. You have empathy, integrity, and natural leadership skills. Last night, you didn't just pay for a stranger's meal. You de-escalated a tense situation, stood up to your manager when he was wrong, and treated every person in this diner with dignity. Those aren't skills you can learn in a classroom. Mrs. Rodriguez had tears streaming down her face, and she wasn't the only one. Several customers were openly staring, some taking pictures and videos with their phones. This was the kind of story that would be shared thousands of times by morning. CEO rewards waitress who helped stranger. Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a check. There's something else. I did some research into your situation, and I learned about your mother's medical needs. This check for $10,000 should cover her medication and treatments for the next year, with some left over for your brother's college tuition. Danielle's hands flew to her mouth as she stared at the check. $10,000. More money than she'd ever seen in one place. Enough to lift the crushing weight that had been pressing down on her family for months. Why? She asked through her tears. Why are you doing this? Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. Because 15 years ago, I was a struggling restaurant worker myself. I made mistakes, faced hard times, and felt the sting of judgment from people who thought they were better than me. But someone gave me a chance, saw potential in me when I couldn't see it in myself. This is how we pay kindness forward. He turned to address Peterson, who had been standing silently throughout the exchange. Mr. Peterson, effective immediately, you're being transferred to our corporate training center. You'll be working with our human resources team to develop better conflict resolution and customer service protocols. Consider it an opportunity to learn from your mistakes. Peterson's relief was visible. He'd expected to be fired on the spot. Thank you, Mr. Green. I'll do better, I promise. I'm counting on it, Marcus said. Then, turning back to Danielle, there's one more thing. I want you to head up a new employee welfare council. Your job will be to identify ways we can better support our staff, better scheduling, emergency financial assistance programs, education benefits. You'll report directly to me. Danielle looked around the diner that had been her second home for 3 years. At Mrs. Rodriguez, whose proud smile could have lit up the whole building. At her coworkers who were cheering and applauding. At the customers who were witnessing this impossible fairy tale come true. When would I start? She asked, still hardly believing this was real. Next Monday, if you're ready. But first, take the weekend to celebrate. You've earned it. 2 weeks later, Danielle walked out of Murphy's Diner at 11 p.m., but this time it was different. Instead of the bone-deep exhaustion of someone working 2 jobs just to survive, she felt the pleasant tiredness of someone who had spent the day doing meaningful work. She'd just finished training the evening staff on de-escalation techniques and had helped implement a new policy allowing managers to comp meals in genuine emergency situations. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kevin. D. Got my grades back. All A's this semester. Thanks for making it possible. Another message from her mother. Picked up my medication today. No problem with payment. I love you, baby girl. As she walked to her new car, a sensible Honda Civic provided by the company, Danielle looked back at the diner's neon sign flickering in the darkness. The building looked exactly the same as it had 3 weeks ago, but everything had changed. She'd learned that kindness was never wasted, that dignity was worth protecting, and that sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing led to extraordinary consequences. Her act of compassion hadn't just changed one stranger's evening, it had transformed her entire life. Under the streetlights, tired but genuinely happy, Danielle Carter smiled and headed home to the first full night's sleep she'd had in years. The fairy tale was real, after all.